An Israeli couple is gunned down in the occupied West Bank. Earlier, Benjamin Netanyahu barely mentions the Palestinian issue during a UN speech, despite a threat by Mahmoud Abbas to end cooperation agreements with Israel. So, is a peace deal further away than ever? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Martine Dennis. Now, the killing of a Jewish couple in front of their children in the occupied West Bank is the latest incident, adding to heightened tensions between Israelis and Palestinians. There have been ongoing clashes between Israeli security forces and Palestinians over who can pray at the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound in occupied East Jerusalem. Meanwhile, Palestinian and Israeli leaders continue their verbal sparring on the other side of the world at the United Nations General Assembly in New York. The Palestinian president, Mahmoud Abbas, says that Israel is increasingly ignoring the terms of the Oslo Accords. But the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, told the UN that he rejects the allegations and welcomes the resumption of dialogue.
They leave us no choice but to insist that we will not remain the only ones committed to the implementation of these agreements, while Israel continuously violates them. We therefore declare that we cannot continue to be bound by these agreements, and that Israel must assume all of its responsibilities as an occupying power.
I am prepared to immediately resume direct peace negotiations with the Palestinian Authority without any preconditions whatsoever. Unfortunately, President Abbas said yesterday that he is not prepared to do this. Well, I hope he changes his mind, because I remain committed to a vision of 2 states for 2 peoples, in which a demilitarized Palestinian state recognizes the Jewish state.
All right, let's have a closer look then at these Oslo Accords. Now, they were landmark agreements. They were signed in 1993 and 1995. It was hoped they would help facilitate a peaceful resolution to the long-standing conflict. The Accords did not stipulate, but implied a 2-state solution, the creation of a Palestinian state alongside Israel. In the meantime, control of the major Palestinian cities in the occupied West Bank and Gaza Strip was transferred from the Israeli military to a newly created Palestinian Authority. But the Palestinians say Israel is increasingly ignoring the agreement, particularly with regard to the release of prisoners and the building of settlements deemed illegal under international law. OK, let's bring in our guests now. In Jerusalem, we have Gershon Baskin, co-chairman of the Israel-Palestine Center for Research and Information. And in Ramallah, in the occupied West Bank, we have Khatib, former Palestinian government spokesman and Vice President for Development and Communications at Birzeit University. Welcome to you both. First of all, can I put to you, please, Ghassan, in Ramallah, the words of Mahmoud Abbas at the UN General Assembly, which had promised to be fairly sensational. In the actual event, proved to be less so. But was this a self-defeating move by the Palestinian president to threaten to tear up Oslo when, in fact, he has no intention of doing so?
I don't think he was threatening of anything. I think he was trying to explain to the outside world that if the world community will continue to allow Israel to violate the agreement and the basic rights of the Palestinians, then this process, this agreement, this relation is bound to collapse. And I think that this is completely realistic. And if you ask any European or American diplomat working here or journalist, he will say the same. He will say that the Israeli practices are making the situations unsustainable, and it is the right and the duty of the President of the Palestinian Authority to warn the international community, the United Nations, of the grave consequences that should be expected if they continue to allow Israel to continue violating the agreement and the rights of the Palestinian people.
So what is the threat behind any kind of warning? There has got to be a threat of action implied. If he's not going to dissolve the Palestinian Authority, end security arrangements with the Israelis, what is he prepared to do?
He is not planning to do anything, but he is suggesting that if things will be kept as it is, if Israel is going to be allowed to continue what they are doing, then things will collapse. It does not require anybody to dissolve anything. I don't think the Palestinians will dissolve their authority, and I don't think the Palestinians will stop the coordination with Israel. I think that the continuity of the current Israeli practices is going to cause a collapse in the situations. It will cause the collapse of the Palestinian Authority. It will cause the collapse of the current relations. The continued, for example, violations of the settlers, the continued violence of the Israeli settlers that was described by Israeli military commanders by being terrorism. This has been allowed by the Israeli government continuously. That will definitely bring reactions and that will feed into the vicious circle, and that will also bring a collapse to the relations between the two sides, including the security cooperation. It's not that the Palestinian side are planning to do something. It's that they are warning that the situations are not sustainable. And I think that anybody living here or monitoring the situations can testify to this fact.
And Gershon, in Jerusalem, a stark warning then coming from the president of the Palestinians that the situation right now is unsustainable. Is this a warning that's being heeded where you are?
I think it's important in reflection of the murderous attack that took last night to remind ourselves that the agreements were made way back in 1993 in order to stop the violence that existed during the first Intifada, which seems so long ago from now. It's also important to remember that the Oslo process was an interim agreement. 6 agreements were signed between Israel and the Palestinians for a 5-year period that was supposed to end in May of 1999. To say that the agreements are not being implemented today is kind of a joke of history. The agreements are not being implemented. Both sides are in breach of their obligations under those agreements. There's just a shell of an agreement that exists today between the parties, which is necessary because daily life demands that some kind of relationship exists. Let's recognize that although 153 countries around the world recognize the state of Palestine can't really exist without Israeli recognition, which it hasn't yet gotten, despite the fact that Netanyahu keeps talking about a 2-state solution. He has not yet recognized the Palestinian state. The state of Palestine has no borders. It has no external control of its borders. All the goods that it receives from abroad have to come from Israel. All of its exports have to go through Israel. This is the reality of the situation. There is no real cooperation today between the government of Israel and the government of Palestine. The security coordination that everyone talks about is more or less an agreement that when the Israelis go into Area A, the fully controlled Palestinian areas, the Palestinian security forces disappear. That's the extent, more or less, of the cooperation or the coordination that exists. What needs to take place is the recognition that the Oslo process no longer exists. A state of Palestine has been declared. There needs to be state-to-state negotiations with the support of the international community, the United Nations, to put down parameters for those negotiations so that we can finally end this conflict, which is resolvable.
And let's go back to Ramallah then and put to you the ostensible offer of immediate peace talks put by Prime Minister Netanyahu at the UN General Assembly, immediate peace talks without preconditions. How seriously should that be taken?
That's a media gimmick. It's not a serious offer because the problem is not lack of negotiations. I don't think any conflict in the world has been negotiated to the extent this conflict has been negotiated. We have been negotiating for 20 years, during which the illegal settlements of Israel in the occupied territories have only doubled, and the number of illegal settlers living in the occupied territories have only doubled. So the issue is not to negotiate or not to negotiate. We have negotiated a lot. The question is whether Israel should be allowed that while negotiating and stalling to continue its illegal practices in the occupied territories. The logic of negotiations would require that while Israel negotiates the future of the occupied territories, they should refrain from determining practically and by force the nature and the future of these territories. Because otherwise the negotiations is going to be only about deceiving the outside world and giving the wrong impression that business is as usual. The issue is not to negotiate or not. The issue is whether Israel is going to continue being allowed to violate the international legality, to continue to prejudice the outcome of the negotiations by the illegal expansion of settlements that every single country in the world, starting with the United States and all other European states, have been condemning and criticizing, but not doing anything in order to stop it.
So effectively,
that is the issue.
Effectively, then, the Palestinian position is that a resumption of dialogue is definitely desirable, but with conditions. The conditions the Palestinians would like attached is a cessation of building on settlements and indeed a release of prisoners. Of course, we're talking about 6,000 prisoners currently in Israeli jails and detention centres, including children and women.
I wouldn't call it condition. I would call it necessary requirements for successful negotiations. Because logically speaking, you cannot negotiate the future of the territories while you are determining its future unilaterally by force by one of the two sides of the negotiations. So if negotiations are to be meaningful, there are certain requirements, different requirements, including that neither of the side of the parties to negotiations should do anything of the kind that would prejudice the outcome of the negotiations. And I think that this is the issue, and it's not condition as much as it's necessary requirement for the success of these negotiations. And we're talking out of experience because, you know, we negotiated for 20 years during which Israel was allowed to continue with the expansion of settlements, and now we barely have any territories to build our future Palestinian state on. So if this will be allowed to continue, then that will practically be the end of the two-state solution, and this is something that is not anybody want to see, not Palestinians and not the international community.
Gershon, how much of a free hand does Prime Minister Netanyahu actually have? How much latitude does he have to actually engage with the Palestinians in a substantial and constructive way, given that the government is exceedingly right-wing and that they are allowing religious nationalism almost to dictate the pace of its relationship with Palestine?
Yeah, I think if Netanyahu is really sincerely interested in negotiating, he has a lot of leeway to negotiate. Even if his government were to collapse, the Labour Party from the opposition would support the negotiations. The Meretz Party, the United Arab List would support sincere, genuine negotiations that are going on. And let's face it, if there are going to be serious negotiations going on, they're going to take place in secret. The best negotiations that ever took place between the Israelis and the Palestinians were secret negotiations that the public was not party to. I would remind Ghassan that it's true that we have negotiated for 20 years, but there are at least 2 times that we came pretty close to an agreement. In Taba in January of 2001, and the Olmert Abu Mazen talks that took place in 2008 brought us very close to an agreement. And I think that what we're lacking here is the kind of leadership necessary to really bring us down the rest of the roadway to an agreement. I would say the distance between where we are and an agreement is leadership. The issue of settlements is very pressing and very troublesome, but we should recall that the entire settlement enterprise in the West Bank has a footprint of less than 5% of the land. Israel controls 100% of the West Bank. They, according to the Oslo Agreement, control Area C, which is 62% of the West Bank, and the settlements have a great amount of control of the areas all around the settlements, but their actual physical footprint is under 5% of the entire territory. So we're not talking about a situation which is irreversible. And we've already discussed in negotiations the possibility of territorial swaps that would adjust the borders and allow for a certain amount of annexation of the main settlement blocks in exchange for uninhabited territories inside of Israel. An agreement could be reached if we had the leadership to do it. I think it's not only a requirement to freeze the settlements during a negotiating period, but I think the Palestinians could also take constructive steps that would be required and I think would help the negotiations, like reining in incitement, which is a very big problem. I've discussed this with President Abbas personally, and he said, we have a problem. I admit we have a problem. Well, they should deal with it. Today, the Fatah spokespeople and Hamas spokespeople, of course, congratulated the murderous attack that took place last night. That doesn't help any kind of negotiation or any kind of trust building or rebuilding the partnership that's been destroyed over the years.
Well, Gershon raises the issue of leadership. Let me go to you now, Ghassan, in Ramallah, and let's talk a little bit more about the President Mahmoud Abbas. Currently, 51 Palestinians say they no longer believe in the viability of a two-state solution. That, according to the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research. Two-thirds of West Bankers would like to see him resign. He's not in a very good position as he's lost the trust of the Palestinian people.
First of all, the fact that majority of Palestinians do not expect that two states is going to be materialized, this is not new at all. I mean, this has been the attitude of the Palestinian people that comes through public opinion polls all along. However, in the same time, when pollsters are asking the public whether they still support the two-state solution or not, there's still a majority among Palestinians who support the two-state solution. However, there is also a majority who do not expect two-state solution to materialize. And the question that you are referring to linked itself to the settlement expansion. The question said, on the light of the settlement expansion, do you expect two states to be materialized? And naturally, a majority of the Palestinians said no. The deterioration of the popularity of President Abbas is due to the failure of the project that he gambled his political career on, which is the peace process. I mean, President Abbas represents the moderate Palestinian leadership, which decided to drop all kind of violence. And if there's going to be a legacy for President Abbas, it's that he succeeded in preventing the violent approach of Palestinians to try to achieve their objective by violence. But this approach has been failure. As I told you, the only outcome of the 20 years of negotiations is the doubling of the size of settlements and the number of settlers. That's why the public is voting no to this line, unfortunately, and President Abbas is the victim of the failure of the peace process, which is, I think, an Israeli responsibility. Now, speaking of leadership, it is important to take into consideration that Israeli public opinion, as indicated to by the results of the successive Israeli elections and not polls, that Israel is drifting to the right and Israel is radicalizing politically, and every single Israeli government is more radical than the one before, and that there is no critical mass, neither in the Israeli public opinion nor in the Israeli political elite, who believe of the possibility of ending their illegal occupation in order to allow for an independent Palestinian state.
Thank you. Can I stop you there? And because I know that Gershon in Jerusalem, you'd like to come in on that.
I just wanted to add one point to what Ghassan said. I think that it's undermining or undercutting the Palestinian achievements to say that the only achievement of the Oslo process was the doubling of settlements. There is a virtual Palestinian state in existence. They've gone through a very intensive process of state building, of institutions, of ministries, of developing cadres of young leadership, of a civil service. There is a state that exists if it would be allowed to exist. And I think that's a great achievement of the Palestinians over the past 20 years. Particularly in the last 5 or 6 years, a tremendous amount of state building has gone on. I want to add about the Israeli public opinion. I think Ghassan is right, both on the Palestinian side and the Israeli side, that I think there's still a majority in Israel who supports a two-state solution, but an overwhelming majority of Israelis who don't think it's possible. The Israelis don't think it's possible because they don't believe they have a partner. That's what we hear from the Palestinians as well, who don't believe that they have a partner. And the reality is on the ground, what we see day to day is that there are no real partners for peace. What I keep reminding people who say to me every day that we have no partner, we have no one to talk to, I believe very strongly that when you declare that you have no partner, you're declaring that you don't want a partner. A partnership doesn't happen naturally. It has to be built. It starts with a decision, and then it's something that you engage in, you work on, and you build.
All right, Gershon, and I put it to both of you. How distressing was it, the fact that President Obama's address to the United Nations General Assembly made no mention whatsoever of the Palestine issue? First of all, to you, Ghassan, in Ramallah.
Well, I think this is very disappointing and this is very harmful. And unfortunately, when the international community refrain from paying attention and trying to help, this automatically plays to the hand of the stronger party to the conflict, who is powerful enough to make changes on the ground by force. So when the international community refrain from interference or helping, the practical translation of this is an indirect support to Israel, because this is like leaving us up to the mercy of the powerful party Israel. That's why I think that this attitude is very negative and needs to be revised. We understand that there are many other very dramatic situations around us, but I think that the international community, the United Nations, the United States should be able to divide its attention and its responsibilities to the different conflicts in the region, including the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Okay,
Gershon, in Jerusalem, without constructive American engagement in the process, is anything going to happen? Clearly, the Americans are rather self-absorbed. Not only do they have to deal with Syria, or not deal with it, as the case may be, but they've also got an election coming up early next year.
Right. Well, here I would differ with Ghassan. I think that the last thing that we want is another American-sponsored peace process and negotiations. Every time the Americans have served as mediator, in the end of the day, they end up being the Attorney General for the State of Israel and apply pressure on the Palestinians rather than applying pressure on the State of Israel, which is what the Palestinians hope they would do. I think that the international community is not quiet about the Israeli-Palestinian issue. We will see, I hope, something emerging in the Security Council, the French-supported resolution of new terms of reference, of parameters and a timetable for negotiations. I think if that would happen and the Americans wouldn't veto it and perhaps support it, that would be a very good thing. And I don't think it's a bad thing if the Israelis and the Palestinians are left to face each other in a room by themselves. As I said, the best negotiations in my mind that have taken place have been when the Israelis and the Palestinians were together in the room. We need the help and support of the international community to ensure implementation of the agreements, because we're very bad at implementing the obligations we take upon ourselves. And here we need the support of the Americans and the Europeans. But I think the best possible negotiation would be if Abbas and Netanyahu were alone in a room where they were both dedicated to reach an agreement. And I think we would end up with a much better agreement than an American-sponsored agreement.
Gershon Baskin in Jerusalem and Ghassan Khatib talking to us from Ramallah. Thank you both very much indeed for a very interesting conversation. And as ever, thank you for watching. You can leave your comments on the programme page on our website, aljazeera.com. You can also post your views on facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or there's always the Twitter sphere at AJ Inside Story. From me, Martine Dennis, and the whole team is bye for now.